Okay, if we have questions, then we will welcome our speakers up on the stage. And if you have questions, raise up your hand and I'll come with a microphone and you can fire away. Yes?
I have a question, maybe it's to Leena, because this transcreation process, how long does it take? And because I assume there will be back and forth, and if you have a lot of text coming all the time, so how do you build a process around that? Because it will be very time consuming. Thank you.
Yes, it is true that it's somewhat time consuming to do it. So if you have a lot of content that you would like to run through this process, then it's the important thing is to agree beforehand on the schedules so that the transcreation team at least will be ready for it. You might also want to do the workshopping and the briefing on general level first in order to have a certain background to build on then later on. And to give you some kind of idea of timelines, if you have a certain timeline idea for usual translation, let's say 2,000 words per day or something like that, this is at least the double time it takes because it's more creative and you need to have the discussion and the dialogue. But if you want to do it, then of course it takes also some time investment from your side, and that needs to be then planned together with the team.
Thank you, Leena.
What are your thoughts on international versions in video? Because that's what my thought from Jani's speech as well, that a lot of people want their information in video, but just some input on what do you think, what should you do in actual language versions? Where can you work with subtitles? If you host a webinar, how do you decide if you should have one English one and some parts localized? Do you have any experience on this subject?
Which one of us?
Which one first?
Well,
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah, good. Of course, it depends on the target. That if you want to go to, specifics market, better to do local videos. But in most cases, the thing is that if you subtitle everything, you can do it. But then you can have multiple versions with the different language subtitles. But at the end of the day, like I told, was that it gets more complicated, more time consuming. You put out the one video, you have to have 7, 8, 12 versions out from that if you are doing subtitles. And if you are doing those original videos, you have to have 7, 8, 12 original ones. But the way I think is that most companies do it like overcomplicated. Because the questions that the customers are asking are pretty common and pretty basics. So it needs to have a really good sound quality, good quality with the camera, and that's it. As long as you answer the questions. And then you need to have like 500 of those, or 1,000 of those videos on multiple languages, which creates a world where you don't afford everything to be in a Hollywood. type of thing. So it needs that you are there on their feed to answer those calls.
And maybe adding to that, Len also wanted to say something, but you can say that after me. As a comment to that, basically, yes, at least the most important video should be in your local languages as well, in terms of whether you do subtitling or voiceovers, or maybe then new versions of your original content altogether. That depends then on the timelines and on the cost, obviously, and on how important those markets are for you. Subtitling is the most cost and time efficient way of doing it, and it also has the additional advantage that many people are watching the videos, let's say in trains or in other public transport or in other places where they are not able to use the voice at all. So in that sense, subtitling does work maybe better. But then, of course, there are also cultures and countries in which people are not used to reading subtitling, and then it might make sense to actually do at least voiceovers, which will then take some either studio time if you're trying to do it on a bit higher quality level, or at least the machine voices that are coming in also more and more as a cost-efficient way of doing it.
I will just add, I think my role here today was to, I think someone described me as the pain giver. I was supposed to talk about the pain and the reality of doing these things. The mistake, we have produced webinars in multiple languages, subtitling the videos as well. The worst mistakes I've made have been when the translation, the language version has been an afterthought. So we plan a campaign, we plan everything out, and we have our schedules, and we go into our production, and we have all the pieces in place, and then we think, oh yeah, Sweden, Denmark, and Finland. Oh yeah, okay, right. And we're in a rush. So if you're going to have multiple language versions, it has to be built into the timeline from the very beginning. So we always go out, the starting point is how many languages are we producing this content in? And we decide that. And that does have an impact on how long it takes. It really does add to the time to get all of this done. If we want to have it out simultaneously across the 4 languages as well. It is time consuming, and I've learned the hard way, definitely. But I do find the subtitling, it's very good. We have the webinar, we do it live in English. Then we have mapped out everything, so we get the transcript, we do the subtitling. We've already got all the assets translated already, because that's the other mistake you make. You focus on one piece of content, you get all of that translated, and then you realize, oh, I've got the landing page, and I've got the emails and everything like that, and the forms, I forgot all about those. So it is really just putting that multilingual part at the very beginning.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
One add on that. If you don't have something to say, don't say it at all. It's better that way. No, it's not about that. Because at the end of the day, the way we are using content is that we want to get entertained or educated. Those are the 2 main kind of categories to put where the content falls into. So at least the content that is actually gets consumed. So and if you're really good on one language and you do that and do not go on a language version if it's not good enough, because nobody watches it anyway.
So question related to the same slide. Thanks, by the way, for a very energetic and nice presentation,
Thanks.
all of you. The 72% want to be educated through video. You were very good with the sources, but who is saying this? Is this HubSpot research as well?
That was a HubSpot research. That was a research.hubspot.com. That's basically the research site.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I want to quote that internally. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one question for Yanni. What would you say is your number 1 tip for marketing in 2019?
Be human. Be human, and that's the hardest part. Honest, human, and everything around the customer as honestly as you can.
Yeah.
Because I think that in the world that we're living in, which is really fast-paced, there is a lot of content around, and we only look for those we care about. And in order to talk to the heart, you need to be really, really honest. And I think that those companies, that those super brands, if we think about all the big ones, when you are in their environment, whether it's a store or an online, or you're talking to the supports, everything is working. You don't have any problems. And they've spent a lot of time on thinking about how do we make our customers' world better, and how do we support that journey, even though that it hurts. And I have a story to tell about this. HubSpot released customer code. You can go to the customercode.com and see what it is, and there's a lot of videos out of that, and one thing was on that customer code, because they really thought about, you know, how do we make our customers better, how do we grow better with the companies. That one thing is that be honest even if it hurts, and they released that customer code September 3rd, September 4th in the Inbound in Boston in the US, and Dharmesh Shah, the co-founder, was having a really good presentation out of that, and it was absolutely fantastic, and everybody was, you know, the customer code was the best thing. The problem was that the following day the whole HubSpot was down. and you know, we get calls, and you know, like what happened, and they had some kind of technical small problem, which turned out to be a huge problem globally, and then the COO JD Sherman wrote a blog article immediately saying, "We're sorry, we're really sorry." And I think that when you are honest and you are sorry when basically bad things hits the fan, you will be granted for that. Everybody understands that mistakes happen, but if you want to hide the mistakes, everybody knows that you are not for real. So I think that, you know, 2019, be honest as you can. Then the simple way is to answer the questions that the customers are actually asking. That's the simplest advice that I can give, that how much money and effort you are putting on those answers. So hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had one question that I got before for Lena. Would you say that transcreation is for all companies, or how do you see that?
Yes, the short answer is yes. But as I've said already before, it's also about prioritizing your content and about deciding when it's actually applicable. Then, of course, you might also want to go for the even more time-consuming and more investment requiring option of recreating all your content in different languages altogether. But you, as a marketer, you need to know what kind of content you want to have in your different target markets, and when it pays off to use transcreation approach, for instance. Or if you don't know that, you can, of course, also then talk about that with your local team, what they do see as the most important things in their market, in their environment, that need to be taken into account, and maybe then put a little more effort into.
Okay, thank you. I did have one more question, if I can. Sorry, Glennon. I got a question as well. What would you say is the first step you need to take if you've decided, okay, I'm going to go, you know, in 4 countries now to localize? What would you say is the first step to take?
Oh dear.
Oh, sorry, the microphone.
What's the first step? Oh, yeah. What's the first step? That's a very difficult question. I'm very tempted to say consider everything.
Good first step.
Yeah, it's the wonderful thing about something like marketing automation is that it does allow, we're a small team, and it does allow us to go multilingual. That's really possible. We can publish our content in multiple languages and reach a broader audience. But there has to be a strategic approach, and everything has to be planned out in advance. Again, the dialogue, I think, is very important as well, that where you're getting your translations done. Of course, we have internal translators, so I've built up dialogue with them, but they're not available at the drop of a hat. I can't just click my fingers and say, I now need you to translate 8,000-word ebook for me. So they have other customer projects. So if I have to go to another resource, I have to make sure that everything is explained in a lot of detail. So consider everything in that sense about just making sure that you've covered everything and that you don't send back these, one-line translation requests that completely out of context. But with good planning, it can be done.
Hi. Also, thank you for a great presentation. It was very, very interesting. The question that I have is, what would you say is like, how do you decide to localize in a market? For example, if you're a Swedish company, you have a lot of customers in, let's say, Norway, Finland. Those probably also speak very good English. Then you have other markets like Asia or I know somewhere Southern Europe where English is maybe not as common, or like people are not as used to it, also through TV and these things. What are the factors, how you would decide now is the right time to localize in a market?
Maybe we'll give Glenn a microphone too, but my first answer to that question would be that as early as possible. If you want to create your brand, if you want to get known in a certain market, then you need to have a lot of content in the language of that market. There are, of course, differences, as you pointed out, in different markets. A research company in the localization industry called Common Sense Advisory published a report some years back about which markets are the most, let's say, resistant to English content. Well, South America is one good example of that. China is another one. And there are other parts of the world, Africa too, to some extent, where English is working even less than in the Nordic countries. But the basic rule also here in the Nordics, where we all more or less understand English and can use it, is that if people have the content in their own language, they are more likely to react to it. The report I'm referring to from CSA actually was called "Can't Read, Won't Buy." So that's what happens.
Well, I would start from the customer and started to see that what are they actually doing? What are they searching? What is happening in the local Google? And then I would look at the sources of traffic to the website on the different areas and try to understand that what are they interested about, and start to work from the data backwards and try to get like attention first to the websites, to the app, to the store, whatever physical environment is involved, and start to work from there. Ask a lot of questions and start to understand what are they are searching for. The problem with English is that people think that it's very common language, but when you go to the Google, the English searches in the local market is lower than the real language that people are speaking, and reverse engineer that would be so that actually then you can translate, or then you can actually do something useful and start to serve the customers, and you can get on the top on the Google on the low-hanging fruits that Lena mentioned really easily in different markets. But in order to get traction out of that, you need to mean something, because people just don't have time to figure out things. You are either there at the first place or you don't. And it's better to be as natural as possible and as real as possible and so on. And because the people are asking the basic questions, the what's, the why's, the how's. And those are normally the biggest search rankings in whatever language. And then have a budget, which is tied to your goals. Because if you have unrealistic goals, you don't get it. So it's better to start small than try to conquer the world at the same time. And the same thing, which I repeat myself: if you don't have nothing to say in any language, don't say nothing at all.
I would just add to that. If you do decide to test with something, and always, of course, A/B testing. So when you ask for something to be translated or localized, you give them 2 versions and you test it out. Because if you have only one version, then you don't know if it's the version itself or it's the fact that you're just not able to actually reach the audience with that language. So at least if you have something to compare, you start getting a little bit more data, and then you can start to make more informed choices after that.
Thank you. Okay, then I will thank so much all our speakers for today. And we'll here for a while, all of us, in case anybody wants to come up, has any questions, then we're here. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks very much.